we're going to have a chat about induction of labour because it's become something that comes up very often in conversations in our groups, and it's a thing that people are frequently coming in and saying, I need information on, and I need to know what it's going to be actually really like, and a bit confused about why they're offering me this induction, or things like that. So yeah, who wants to start and tell us like a basic overview of what does it mean to be induced?
I can do that. So induction of labour is basically getting your labour started when it hasn't started by itself. So it hasn't physiologically started, and there's a reason to do that. Generally, that's because there's a medical reason that it would be beneficial to mum, birthing person or baby, or that it's a case of you've gone past your estimated due date and it's been agreed that actually inducing you would be a good idea. Or it might be that your waters have broken and you haven't then had spontaneous contractions as a result. And the concern there is that there may be a slightly higher risk of infection. So once your waters have broken by themselves, then they would like labour to start. So induction of labour will quite often follow from that point onwards. As Sarah said, it's an offer of induction. You should be presented with lots of information about it so that you can make the best informed choice for yourself and for your baby. But there isn't a right answer as to whether you should or shouldn't be induced. Only you can make that decision as to whether that's the right thing for you or not. Weighing up all the pros and cons, looking at the benefits of risks both of being induced and of not being induced. So yeah, I think the most common thing that people think about for induction is being post due date, so being overdue in inverted commas. So even though standard gestation is thought to be 37 to 42 weeks, actually a lot of people are being spoken to about induction prior to 40 weeks, sometimes being offered a sweep, which often isn't seen to be really a form of induction, even though it is, with more and more people being induced from the 40-week mark purely for being past their due date, which we know is an estimated due date, and so not entirely accurately necessary. And that means that actually babies will sometimes come before that date, but sometimes they will wait until 41, 42 weeks and then come just by themselves. So trusting that sometimes is really important.
When induction is brought up by your midwife, perhaps it is before 40 weeks, perhaps it's a description of, so this will be your 40-week appointment, and then you won't have a 41-week appointment because I'm going to book your induction date for that day when you'll actually already be, when you're just about to be 41 weeks. So yeah, you won't need to see me again after that. How would you turn that conversation into a conversation in which you have it recognised that you actually that's an offer and you don't have to accept it, when quite frequently presented as just something that will happen to you, and you know, why would you not want that to happen to you? That's how it's done.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's not any one individual midwife's fault, but sometimes because there is such a kind of procedural culture on exactly what you've said. So when you get to X weeks, I'm just going to write down that would be the day that you're induced. You know, that might be happening at 36 weeks, 37 weeks, maybe even before that, that midwives are thinking out loud almost as they're in an appointment with you, writing into your notes. In a sense, they're planning, they're just innocently planning your future care or the potential pathways of your future care. And they're saying that out loud. So this would be the date that we would book you in for an induction. And you know, as most people are aware, the system and those individuals within the system are under such immense pressure that even if they, you know, they hold those ethics and their professional conduct, you know, they take that very seriously. And if you question them, well, is that an offer or not? Of course they'd say it's an offer. This is an offer of induction. It is not me saying you have to have it ever. But because they're under such immense pressure, I think what's happening quite often from listening to people's stories, from my perception of it anyway, is that it's not coming across as an invitation. It's coming across as just a stream of consciousness from a very, very busy midwife who is trying to forward plan dates. And so it will just blurt out. So there's no issue. You know, I've encountered several people recently where there's no medical reason. There are no risk factors at all at that stage. And they're talking to somebody, you know, before they're anywhere near overdue even. And they're saying, well, this is the date that you'd be induced. Well, that strikes a fear of God into many, many people, you know, like, why are you saying I'm going to be induced? But of course, you don't necessarily say that because we're trained to conform and we're trained to be polite and we're trained, you know, from when we go to school as little toddlers, and, you know, we're trained to kind of go nod and say, okay.
What can you do prior to that point? You could certainly, if you've had a textbook pregnancy, low risk, no reason to think that you need to be induced for any medical reason, even as early as 30 weeks, you can say to your midwife, I don't want to discuss induction until I bring it up. I don't want you to say to me at 40 weeks that I'll be induced at 41 weeks. If it reaches that point, I will bring it up in conversation, but actually, can you write it in my notes that induction isn't to be discussed? Stick it on a sticker on the front of your notes if you want to. I do not wish to discuss induction until X, Y, Z. And you can change your mind, and we say this all the time, don't we, that you can change your mind at any point, and you can decide at your 40-week appointment that you don't want an induction. At 40 weeks plus 3, you can decide that you do want induction, and that's okay, but the ball should be in your court, not somebody telling you, well, this is what's going to happen. And then obviously if something changed and your medical circumstances changed, and at 39 weeks, actually it was you kind of suggested that it would be beneficial to you or baby to be induced, then fair enough, you have that conversation then. But you can put it out there from the beginning that you just don't want to discuss it at all. And that's okay to do that as well. I think we have lost that autonomy, if you like. We kind of wait to be told what to happen. And sometimes we just need to take control of the situation and say, okay, this is how I want it to go. This is how I want the conversation to go.
So in my third pregnancy, I had the same midwife as I had had in my second pregnancy. And it was so she was already someone who knew me really well. And the wonderful thing about that was when it said in her list of things she was supposed to do that day to talk to me about induction, she just said, I'm assuming that you'll go for expectant management rather than induction, should we get to that point. And that was the end. And I said, yes, that's correct. That's what I'll be doing. So sometimes if you have the opportunity to get to know your midwife and they start to get to know you, then you might find that conversation goes slightly differently anyway. But also, if it's a midwife who you don't know on the day, or if it's somebody at the hospital or whatever, you might find that they say, well, we'll be offering you an induction on X date, or I'll be booking your induction. You say, actually, I'm thinking I might choose expectant management instead. It gives the impression that you're not just panicking, you've thought about this and you have some idea what you're saying and what's available already, so that information, that just, even if you don't actually know much more than that, just if you know that the two options are induction of labour or what's called expectant management, which just means that you'll be a little bit more closely monitored than you've been during your previous weeks of pregnancy, and just make sure that you and the baby are okay. But just knowing that that's an option, that you're going to say, actually, I think I might think about that. It comes up as a maybe feels a little bit less confrontational than going, no, I'm not being induced.
And certainly for a lot of midwives, if you say at 38, 39 weeks, actually, I really don't want to be induced, I don't really want to discuss it at the moment, as Sophie says, most of them will be absolutely fine with that. It is just a tick box procedure, a step pathway that they have to follow, and so they follow it. But actually, if you say to them, is there any reason medically that I need to be induced? Because if not, I just want to see what happens and let nature take its course. For the most part, they'll just go, okay, that's fine, we'll write that down. It seems scary, I think, to go against what your care providers are suggesting, but knowing that actually they're on your side and they want what's best for you as well, and they know that if you can go into labour spontaneously, that's far better for you as well. Knowing the right questions to ask is so important at your appointment. So if induction is being discussed because it's a medical need, that it's either going to be beneficial to you or to your baby, knowing the right questions to ask. What are the risks? What are the risks to my baby? Can you tell me in numbers what that risk looks like? What is the risk if I don't do this? If I don't choose to go with induction, what would the risk be then? So that you can make that informed choice, because if you haven't got all the information, you're just blindly saying yes or no to something. So asking the right questions from your caregivers and knowing that you don't have to agree to anything at that point in time. You can ask the questions, you can get the information, you can go away, you can do some more reading, and then you can phone them back the next day. And you may say, thank you for that. That was really important and interesting. And yes, I'd like to book a date for induction. Or you might go away and go, actually, I don't feel that this is the right thing for me to do right now. And you can phone them back and say, at the moment, I'm going to decline your offer induction, but I will give you a call in a few days and that may change. We'll see. But knowing you don't have to set anything in stone is really important.
So in terms of if they say, you know, your baby's big, again, and, you know, having the freedom to ask the questions. So what positions do midwives generally offer, or what positions do you offer, and encourage people, women like myself, to be in if our baby's going to be big? Do you guys use the Gaskin maneuver? Ask the question, do they know it? Do they use it? You know, it's been proven over and over and over and over again to prevent shoulder dystocia so many times. So, yeah.
And looking at a bigger picture, particularly with big babies. Yeah. How big are you?
Accuracy. Yeah.
How big are your family members? Ask your parents if you're able to. How big was I when I was born? How big were my siblings when they were born? Is there a family history that your family just produced 8 or 9 pound babies? Because if they do, then that actually says that your baby is the right size for you.
Yeah.
It's all shrouded in risk, really, isn't it? And I suppose it's like anything else. You would like to know if we're going to be operating in a system which is about managing risk, which you can't really avoid, then you also want to know what the risks are of induction, which I think is, you know, is what you were saying, wasn't it, Sarah? But I think often you are given the information about the risks of what will happen if you do not induce, but you're not given the other side of that openly. So, you know, it's not a confrontational question to ask your care provider, could you just give me the risks both sides? So what are the risks if I do have the induction? Do I have a higher likelihood of my own hormones not quite working, or a higher risk of cesarean section, or a higher risk of other interventions? You know, is that the case? That's not a confrontational question, is it? It's just a way of opening up a discussion with your care provider. And obviously you can check that information for yourself as well from other sources. But I don't think any of it has to be a kind of, it's a dialogue. It doesn't have to be a confrontation. It doesn't have to be a fight. None of it does.
And any risk assessment is what if I do, what if I don't? Do I
Exactly.
climb that extra ledge on the mountain? Is that going to be too risky if I do, if I don't? What things do I need to put in place if I do that? You know?
Yeah, and looking at it like you would risk assess a work situation.
Yeah.
You know, like any other risk assessment issue, actually you don't necessarily just jump in and take the action, do you? You see, well, what would happen if I don't? That was the first in a risk assessment. Well, what will happen if I do nothing? That is the first step you take in assessing something.
Well, I mean,
So
benefits and risk is the second thing. So it's literally doing exactly that thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And asking specifically for your hospital stats, because every hospital is going to be different across the country. So you can ask specifically and say, okay, last month, can you tell me how many people were induced and how many of those inductions needed augmentation of labour? How many of those labours then resulted in a caesarean? Like, they will have that information. The hospital will keep that information. And you can say, I don't need you to give it to me right this minute, but if you could find that out for me and let me know, that would be really helpful. And kind of bat it back to them that way as well. But if you do go for induced, sorry, Sarah.
It's just that thing that we always say, isn't it, again, about you don't have to persuade your caregivers of anything. Your caregivers have to give you the information that you need to make your informed decision.
Treat it like they're selling you a luxury holiday. And they need to be explaining to you why. That would be a good thing.
Why would I go to this particular destination? What about the other destinations that are available?
Yeah.
Yeah, where else can I go? Exactly.
And that's it. There are always options. What are my options? For a lot of people, the concern as well is, if I start down the route of induction, where does this lead me? Particularly induction in a VBAC situation. So it's quite possible that the previous birth, the caesarean birth, was quite traumatic because maybe they were left a long time before that decision was made. So having that discussion, saying, okay, I'm in a situation where I'd really like a vaginal birth this time. We've agreed that the route best for me, probably because of X, Y, and Z, is induction. But at what point do I have the ability to say, actually, stop now? I just want to have a caesarean again because I don't want to go through the things that I went through last time. And knowing that you can do that is powerful, not thinking that you just have to accept what's happening. And in any situation, I think, if it's reached that point where actually it's taking a really long time, at any point you can stop and say, can you go through my options with me right now? Okay, you're talking about doing this now to try and make my labour progress or speed up or whatever it might be. I've been here this many hours already. If it's looking like actually I'm going to have a caesarean, I'd rather have a calm, semi-planned caesarean in the next hour or so without any further intervention than be here for another 6 hours before you decide that that's the route we need to take.
So you get to the point where you've heard about induction of labour and you've weighed up the pros and cons. And what if you get to the point and you're like, yep, this is what I'm going to do. I feel like it's the right choice for me right now. I need to pack up my bag and I need to head off to the hospital to start this process. What can I expect and what can I do to help myself in this situation? What can I do to look after myself, to help myself cope with what will it actually be like? Anybody got any ideas about that?
Midwife says to you, okay, so we're looking at induction and we'll book you in for that date. For a lot of people, they'll just go, okay, then that's fine, thinking they'll pop into hospital, the labour will be induced, maybe 12 hours later, their baby will be born, and then they'll go home again. Not actually understanding that you go into hospital, you may be there an hour or so whilst they do various tests and monitor baby and fill in the paperwork, and then they may start the procedure. It may be 12 hours, it may be 24 hours before either they're able to break your waters or you start getting contractions, and understanding that it can be a really long process is so important. Again, coming back to just being able to make those informed decisions, knowing that it's going to be a long process. And yes, after that 12-24 hours, you may then just go into physiological labour, and that would be great. But still knowing that that's a long time to be there. Equally, if they're busy, you may be sitting there for a long time before they actually even get around to seeing you. You're going to be on a ward for the most part with other people who are being induced. So it's not like going in and having your own little room and just getting on with it. Being aware of those factors is just so important, that if you are being induced, asking your midwife to go through the process with you, so that you have an idea go out the window just because you're being induced. For a lot of people, once the initial induction happens, actually the body physiologically does what it needs to do, and you can have a pool birth. Lots of people will go on to have a pool birth even though they've been induced. It doesn't prevent you from having those things, but if you've got the knowledge of what the process will be and the stages that might happen, then you take out the element of fear, which can often slow things down. So if you kind of got an idea of what's happening, that's really going to benefit you.
Yeah, that's very good.
And one of the biggest things to remember, which is, you know, it won't necessarily happen like clockwork. You won't get there and suddenly you're in labour and it's all going to plan. You could be waiting around a heck of a long time, right, in between different stages of it, and things might not happen. Now, hopefully, if you have decided you're going down that path, one of the things that might be happening is that your body might actually be ready to go into labour already anyway. So you might start to be kind of in those very early stages before you're having the interventions. But being prepared to wait is a really important thing for you to manage your expectations, so that you don't get really frustrated and stressed out by the time you're there, waiting for it to happen right now, having lots of things to occupy yourself. So all of the things that we always talk about in terms of going into labour in general, but especially things that are going to promote your oxytocin, because that's going to help with the whole plethora of everything else that's happening to you. So things that are going to fill your senses in a positive way: earphones, eye masks, earplugs, potentially things that smell the way you want them to smell, things that smell of home, potentially,
I think that smell is so important. I've had lots of clients who've been quite traumatized, and smell has been one of the big triggers. Like in hospitals, they're always cleaning, aren't they? And cleaning products, and nausea, that combination of things. So if you've got a blanket, like from your sofa, from your bed, with your favorite smells on it, if your partner's not with you for whatever reason, if they're away, if they can't get in, whatever, maybe their smell, your mom's perfume, whatever might be the thing that would just bring you smell of a toddler's clothing that you're away from or something. But
so powerful. So and it's something that, let's say you probably didn't start off your pregnancy planning to be induced at the end. Maybe you did, but you probably didn't. So you don't have to throw everything that you planned for out, and all of the things that you've planned for in labour in terms of your senses can still play a part in an induced labour. So exploring things like essential oils as well with that smell, kind of, although you may like other oils later on and different smells when you're further on in your pregnancy, all the way through, just having a sniff of things and seeing if it evokes a positive response. Recently was helping somebody to explore essential oils, and they smelled neroli and they were like, it smells of home, completely utterly smells of home, and they hadn't known that oil was home to them. but yeah, so just exploring those things beforehand. Taste as well, yeah, sound, all of your senses.
And music, if you're somebody really affected by music and you know there's songs that put you in a good mood or calm you down, or maybe you're feeling angry and you want to get something out, do you have it like people don't think about an angry song. An angry song can be really good, you know, just to let off steam. If you're feeling a bit frustrated, just getting that out, and you know, because trying to tell somebody who to relax who's got a lot of adrenaline pumping through them is not useful. But also, like you say, if you've got, like, for example, the song Happy, like it's very dancey, isn't it? Or you know, a song that just makes you bop, you know, and makes you, you know, you put it on, you start moving, you start bopping, and then you smile, and then the smile happens, and then, you know, and actually, as we know, smiling is really, really positive in labour as well, because of what it does down below. But yeah, it's all those things that can really, I think, really make a big difference. If you can get that comfort zone, it allows more of nature to take its course if it's going to kick in that way.
Downloading things like, if there's a podcast, you know, that makes you really laugh, and you can have a really good giggle at, or downloading on iPlayer or something like that, if there's a comedy series or a film or a particular comedian that makes you really laugh in those early stages, if nothing's really happening. So for example, at the moment, Dilapan rods are being used in the local hospital trust. They insert those and it could be 12 hours before anything else happens. So literally you've got 12 hours killing time because nothing's really happening. So having things to fill that time and things that are going to make you feel good, be it comedy shows or a funny podcast or whatever, can be really helpful. And don't, just because you're in hospital doesn't mean you can't phone people. So you might want to phone a friend who you know is going to make you really laugh. Or if you've got a toddler at home, FaceTime them and get them to talk to you and do silly things that toddlers do. Anything that gets the endorphins flowing as well as the oxytocin is going to be really beneficial. And you're not sitting there clock watching and not feeling like you have to suddenly be up and moving around and doing all these things, because particularly quite often the beginning of that induction is just about starting to get the cervix open. It's not even about trying to get those contractions going. It's about opening the cervix enough to get the waters broken. So you can rest, you can have a sleep. As Sophie said, take your eye mask, put your earplugs in, or relaxation on ear headphones or whatever, and have a snooze. Because if you've gone at 8 o'clock in the morning, it may be that your labour really kicks off at 8 in the evening and then potentially through the night. So saving your energy and having a snooze at that point, there's nothing wrong with that either. There's no set pathway at this point. There's no right or wrong things that you should be doing.
Movement, you know, you can keep moving. You can move, you know, you can still ask for monitoring to be led by you rather than just be hooked up to a machine and having to stay still. You can move, and generally it's encouraged as well, isn't it? But you know, yeah, movement.
I was thinking that too. I mean, I was trying to think where in the hospital might be useful. I thought some people may have done like classes with Sarah, where there's movement, yoga classes where there might be really nice gentle stretches to do, which maybe on the ward may not be that easy, but maybe like the prayer rooms, you know, might be somewhere really peaceful, just to just have a little bit of, like, you want to go meditate, or yeah, if you don't feel like walking but you want to do some movement that, you know, just requires a bit of a peaceful space and a bit of floor, that might be useful too.
They have balls, they have birth balls in the hospital. So if you just want to be upright and rotating round, or just bobbing up and down on one of those, ask for them to bring you one. They are available if you need one. Or just walking, just going for a wander, up and down some stairs, a little bit harder.
Go for coffee, cafe, or chocky in the cafe. Yeah, just it's sort of normalizing that you're not sick. You know, if you're just waiting for labour, you're not sick.
Eating, you know, You can still eat in there.
People think, oh, I'm
Yeah.
going to be induced, I'm going to be put on the drip. And actually the induction of labour is the literal starting of it. So it's the sweep, it's either the pessary or the Dilapan rods that they're now using, balloon catheter to open the cervix, and then the rupture of membranes. And then the drip comes for the augmentation of labour. If things are kind of starting but not doing what they need to do, the drip comes after that. And so for a lot of people, they don't need the drip if the induction has done what it needs to do to tip the body physiologically into labour, and then it carries on doing what it needs to do.
If you do end up being offered the drip, which is when medication called syntocinon, a synthetic form of oxytocin, is gradually introduced to your body by way of a needle inserted either into your wrist or elbow. This is another point where you have the opportunity to go through the decision-making process we've talked about earlier, asking your care providers what the benefits, risks, alternatives are before deciding whether to go ahead or not. If you do decide to go ahead, the other intervention that's part of this process is the need for continuous monitoring. It may be that you can still continue to use many of the things you've been using up till that point to help you work through your contractions. Or it may be that you want to consider other options, such as an epidural. When you're planning for your birth, it's worth having a plan for if you take up this offer, regardless of whether it comes during an induction of labour or after a labour starts spontaneously, but then for some other reason doesn't keep going as it would usually be expected to. One option, for example, that's been shown to be helpful when you're using an epidural is to also use a peanut ball between your legs to help keep a good amount of space in your pelvis for your baby to come through. As Sarah said before, very often induced labours end up with the baby being born without any further assistance being needed. But there is also the possibility that if the pushing stage of labour goes on longer than you or your care providers are comfortable with, an assisted delivery, either with a vacuum cup or with forceps, might be offered, or a caesarean birth might be offered. Again, these offers can be discussed before you choose which one's right for you and your baby. Hopefully, we've given you some information that you'll find helpful, or when you're offered an induction of labour, and if you decide to go ahead with an induced labour and birth. As always, we want to be sure that you know this is just information and not advice. Our only advice is that you talk things over with your care provider and make every decision that's right for you in your own individual circumstances. If you ever want any support, you're always welcome to come along to our peer support groups. Please get in touch if you would like more details.